This week on Quadriga, Chancellor Merkel's course. Is Europe set to follow? It's make or break for the Chancellor and for the eurozone. In the latest scramble for a solution to the crisis, it was she who called the shots. With French President Nicolas Sarkozy in tow, Angela Merkel demanded rigorous debt limits for all eurozone members and automatic sanctions against breaches. Only Great Britain refused to follow. But doubts immediately surfaced about whether the Chancellor's course can really save the euro. Your host, Melinda Crane.
Is Europe on track for a new start, as the Chancellor vowed this week, or for Götterdämmerung? That's what we want to talk about today on Quadriga with a group of experts who've been following events closely.
Almut Müller heads the Alfred von Oppenheim Center for European Policy Studies at the German Council of Foreign Relations. She's also the editor of Berlin Brief, an English-language briefing on German foreign policy. Friedrich Thelen has long written on economic developments in Germany, starting his career at the German weekly newspaper Die Zeit and later moving to the business weekly Wirtschaftswoche, serving as bureau chief first in Bonn and later in Berlin. Quentin Peel is international affairs editor of the Financial Times. A seasoned reporter with experience in Africa as well as Europe, he previously served as the paper's chief correspondent in Germany and also covered the European community as Brussels bureau chief.
Mr. Peel, last week's agreement certainly hasn't gone down very well in the Anglo-Saxon world. The press has been very, very critical. Britain opted out, and even Barack Obama had some pretty negative things to say. Did the EU go down the wrong path in following the Chancellor's insistence on German-style fiscal prudence?
I don't think it did go down the wrong path, but I don't think it went very far down the path at all. Because what, as I understand it, Angela Merkel really wants is to launch at least big steps towards fiscal union in Europe. And that means completing the monetary union that underpins the single currency. That she's identified the real problem inside this monetary union is there's no fiscal coordination. Now, whether this summit is actually seriously going to get towards that end goal is the question, I think, that the markets are asking too. The markets are saying, I'm not sure you're going to succeed with this path.
Certainly the markets quickly lost confidence in where the EU is heading.
As they've been doing all the time. Each time in this eurozone crisis, it's looked like too little too late. But I'm not sure the markets actually know what the hell they want. They just want to be bailed out from the bad decisions they made before.
Friedrich Thelen, did the agreement to try to right the wrongs of Maastricht, as it were, that's what the Chancellor at least is saying. She says this finally will repair the fundamental errors that were made when the Eurozone was created. Did this go far enough, do you think? Are the markets simply too shy at this point?
Well, I don't know about the shyness of markets, but the proof of the cake lies in the eating. We're not yet in the process. Well, we must give it a bit of time. If these governments down in these deficit-stricken countries start to renew, and it's not only saving money, it's restructuring and not consuming so much on credit. That's what it was all about. They consumed more than they produced, and we financed it from the north. And so the push for it is not a pro-European. It's stringency, but the danger of unforeseen development, especially in Germany and in other countries as well, which brought the European train a bit in moving. It is anxiety. It is anxiety for markets or for economic development in these countries, which is going to ruin, which could ruin the rest of Europe.
Ms. Müller, isn't this partly a short-term, long-term problem? What was agreed on last week is essentially an effort at long-term restructuring. But we've got a very big short-term problem here. We have the markets losing confidence, many countries unable to issue new debt, bank liquidity drying up. Are such agreements as we saw evolving last week really the answer to that?
Well, I think you're right. We have to face the issue that there's essentially two layers. I mean, there is a need for acute reaction and a bold reaction. This is what our American friends remind us of, and Brits probably as well, pointing out where is the big bazooka. But the second layer is that the European Union is working, as Quentin P. was describing, in an incomplete system. It's incomplete in the sense that we have a monetary and currency union, which doesn't deserve the name, essentially. So there is a system under stress, and the system is incomplete. So the European governments have to do two things at a time. They have to find short-term answers, which has proven very, very difficult, and they have to find structural answers as well. This is not very satisfying for all those that only look at the short term, of course. But I think it's very important, and I agree with Quentin Peel, that at least under the pressure of globalizing markets, governments, a majority of European governments have decided to go towards more fiscal union, something that was unthinkable. It will take time. It's going to be a bumpy road. It's going to be a messy road. But this is the direction things are taking, and this will bring about a completely new European Union, in my view.
Quentin Peel, the Anglo-Saxon point of view seems to be that boosting growth is really what's needed right now, and that this austerity plan, German-style prudence, is absolutely the opposite of that.
Yeah, I think that's what they've been, the big bazooka question, where is the big bazooka in Europe? And I think what Frau Merkel is saying, and I see this as quite a tussle, really, between Frau Merkel and the markets. She's saying short-term solutions don't work. Indeed, short-term solutions don't do what Friedrich wants them to do. They actually make it easier for the southern countries to carry on living the life of the grasshopper while the northern ants work away to pay for it. And so that's why Germany is so cautious about going down the short-term route. It's really, I think, a huge question out there whether this long-term versus short-term conflict isn't going to end in total tears for everybody.
Friedrich Thelen, explain to us, what are the roots of the German resistance to measures that might boost creditworthiness and liquidity? Eurobonds, perhaps allowing the European Central Bank to play a larger role. Why are the Germans so adamantly opposed? Is it just this post-traumatic stress from the inflation of the 20s?
No, it's not post-traumatic, but they have seen for the last 10 years that if you open the gates for credits, cheap credits, running that way until the moment that the Germans can't pay for it anymore. In the end, it might turn into inflation. Either Eurobonds or any other intelligent method to get to the money of the northern countries, to pump it in there without, and there I agree with Quentin, saving alone is not the answer, because then you're back to the 30s, you are to the Bruning policies. It is restructuring and telling your own people, hey, folks, the time of free lunches is over, and we're living 40-50% above our productivity, and it's now up to come to what we really are, and we're not going to get financed by big uncle, Auntie Angela Merkel or anyone else in the north. We must live on our own, and this is a very tough job.
I think one of the best things that's happened, one of the pieces of really good news that's happened for the eurozone in the last few weeks, is the arrival of Mario Monti as the Italian Prime Minister. I mean, getting rid of Silvio Berlusconi, who was a total disaster, and bringing in as Prime Minister one of the very few far-sighted, good people who could actually turn the Italian economy around, who's totally aware of the two things he needs to do. One, cut the debt, but to get growth going in order to do it. And if Italy can turn round, then perhaps this crisis might see an end. But that is a big, big if.
But of course, there's another point of view on Mr. Monti, and that is that the crisis is undermining democracy. That
I think that's total rubbish, absolute rubbish. The man who undermined democracy in Italy is Silvio Berlusconi, who was corrupt and who actually used his newspapers to completely distort the system. And Mario Monti has been quite properly elected as a caretaker. Yes, he's a non-party caretaker by the president with a huge majority in Parliament, enormous support in the population. It's not undermining democracy.
But only one answer to that, and I agree with you, but she has a point in it. It was not Parliament bringing him to power, it was the markets bringing him. If the markets wouldn't have exercised this sort of constraint on Italy, Berlusconi would be in forever. I mean, winning the next election again, because the whole system was turned around. It was knitted for him personally. And so the markets must still be in control, at least.
The question is, Müller, whether European governments that are democratically motivated can take the measures needed to get this crisis under control. If we look at the German Chancellor's reluctance to move down the road toward Eurobonds, that has a whole lot to do with the fact that many, many Germans are very skeptical at this point, her voters.
Absolutely, and I think you have a very important point here. I mean, we've had throughout the year discussions about is democracy really fast enough for globalizing markets that work essentially on a mouse click? And, we had a debate that was framed as risk factor involvement of parliaments, which I felt was odd, to say the least. Of course, parliaments want to have their say, and we will see, and that brings me to your question. I mean, will governments be able to respond? What we have seen last week is only some sort of framework agreement, a kind of direction towards an agreement to move towards fiscal union, whatever that means in the end. I mean, we have not seen details yet. Governments are telling us there will be a treaty hammered out within a few months, and we'll see a lot clearer in March. I doubt that we will see a sort of cosmetic solution to this. For a start, we don't take the Lisbon Treaty as a base, but a treaty outside of the treaties, which will make things more complicated. We have a whole lot of questions related to that, in detail. What does it mean to go towards fiscal union? And here, I'm very, very sure parliaments will want to have a say. Civil society wants to have a say, because I agree with you, Quentin Peel, pointing out that this is a new direction, a new quality, a new level of integration that is being aimed at now. It needs democratic underpinning. If that is not happening, this will be another step into a direction of losing citizens. I'm not saying it's impossible to convince voters. I'm not sure Eurobonds is a topic I see sort of the Germans to sign up to, but in other areas I see it's possible. But clearly it will be a this treaty reform, this new round of treaty reform will be very messy again.
Quentin Peel, I would like to dig in a bit deeper on the question of where do the German ideas come from? The sense that, we've heard the Chancellor say in the past, everybody needs to be like a Swabian housewife, and she wouldn't spend more than she actually has in her piggy bank. There's an idea, of course, in the Anglo-Saxon world that there is this bugaboo of inflation and that the Germans just can't get past that. Is it really as simple as that?
I think there are several levels to this. What has always struck me about the debate in Germany on economics is how narrow it is, that there isn't a really open debate. It's amazing how many people seem to believe in this very narrow monetarist view. But the truth
no Keynesians,
is,
no real German Keynesians.
About 3.5, And the thing is that it's not just a memory of the trauma of the inflation of the 20s and the 40s, it's a memory of success. It's actually, we built the German economic miracle on the basis of this stability culture. And we actually proved that with a strong currency, the Deutschmark, you become very competitive, because you have to be. And you Brits or you Americans who've allowed your currencies to sink and sink have actually always been living in cloud cuckoo land, because your competitiveness is just coming from a devaluation. So that's very deep in the German culture. And I think that Frau Merkel, even though, of course, she comes from a non-market society, grew up in Eastern Germany when it was communist, she has bought into that.
Interestingly enough, it hasn't been all that long since this country actually was languishing under the burden of the transfer payments that came with unification and under very, very high unemployment. Let's take a brief look at the changes in the past 10 years that have made this the healthiest and strongest economy in Europe.
The reforms known as Agenda 2010 ultimately cost him his office. Against resistance even within his own party, SPD Chancellor Gerhard Schröder boxed through far-reaching changes to the German labor market and social welfare system. With unions simultaneously exercising restraint, wages fell and employment rose, along with productivity. The retirement age was raised. And in 2009, politicians decided to tackle the national debt, amending the Constitution to impose an automatic brake designed to stop deficit spending by both federal and state governments.
Friedrich Thelen, two questions. How resilient is the German economy? It's certainly riding high right now, but we know very dependent on exports, so lots of vulnerability to other countries' economies. That's number one. And number two, is this really the right recipe for everybody else? It may work for Germany, but can we be so sure that it's right for everyone?
Well, start with the second question, answer to that. Well, this question has been put in the Maastricht Treaty. We joined one eurozone, and then you can't say, well, is it the right recipe? Governments like Italy had the chance of devaluation. They did it time and time and again and stayed competitive. But now this chance is no longer there because they can't devaluate the euro because it's a common currency. So the question whether that's the right recipe for those countries is a question which should be put in 2001 when Maastricht Treaty sort of really came into working, or even in the signing in 1992. Question number one is, well, for Germans, I want to add to what Quentin has said. Economic growth has another function in this country than in any other country in Europe, because patriotism, national solidarity, or nationalism, sound one, is no longer an option in this country. After the Second World War, Germany has gone away from any national symbols, only football, soccer playing. I mean, that's another ball game. But in the general terms, they don't want to participate in wars. Look at Libya, look at wherever. They want to be at home in a little garden, fly to Mallorca for their holidays, drive a nice car. But please don't bother us with other things. We want well living at home. But if it starts to stop, if the economy goes down, really down, we didn't have that since 1949. This is sort of the permanent promise of the government to the people of Germany, you will live fine in our time. Sort of Harold Macmillan, you never had it so good, you will have it so good with us. So if that is broken, then you see how this nation is falling into pieces.
I mean, I heard the German finance minister saying at the CDU's party conference, inflation always hits the little people. It always hits the weakest. And there it occurred to me, perhaps for the first time, that maybe it's not about inflation, maybe it's about social peace and anxiety about social disruption.
Yes, I mean, I'm of a younger generation, and I don't, I struggle with the idea of how deeply Germans still think about inflation. I think a whole number of people don't. I already struggle a little bit with that topic. But then coming to your point, yes, social peace is the thing. For now, Chancellor Merkel keeps on telling everybody, now, we're in crisis. We have to come up with a bold reaction. Germans will look around and think, well, it's not all that bad. So if it's not our crisis, whose crisis is this? Not ours, but we're bailing out others. So there already is some psychological strange situation. And then once Germans start to feel that actually the welfare state will not be able to survive because where we are now is certainly not the worst point. We're going to go far, worse. So once people here in this country feel what it means to be declining, and Germany is, for now is doing good, but, already. So when this starts, I think social peace is a big question to be addressed.
But I think that Germany is buying its social peace at the expense of social upheaval in a society like Greece, or one's seen it in Spain, Italy, and so on. I think that is the danger. And there is a very curious disconnect about this whole crisis, which strikes me, which is that in Germany, on the whole, people are saying, crisis? What crisis? Things are going all right in Germany. So the pressure is not on for Germany to bail out these countries that are in real distress. I mean, Greece is in a total mess.
Not yet, but that was my question to Friedrich Thelen. How resilient is the German economy? We saw that little report about its successes of the past. You talked about riding on success, but isn't the fact that it's very, very vulnerable?
Well, it's certainly because it's exposed to exports, and if the world economy comes down, then Germany goes very quickly down. We saw it in 2009.
But Quentin, this argument of yours is very much of Madame Lagarde when she was finance minister. She said the Germans are responsible. Why do they export so strongly into other parts of Europe? But we don't export so much to Greece or Portugal or Spain. It's not true. We do export to Italy, but anyhow...
Yeah, but her answer was, you should buy more yourself. Not export less, but buy more. And this is one of the problems with the German consumer. They are actually rather comfortable. They don't see any reason to buy more.
Yes, but her argument was then, and that is very much French thinking, of state intervention in industry. The wages should go up, but wages in this country do not go up because Mrs. Merkel, whoever is Chancellor at the time, is going to say wages go up. It is a sort of it's a dealing between the unions and the entrepreneurs. So the idea is from a different world.
But there's a resentment of Germany growing in the rest of Europe, which actually is quite dangerous, I think.
Yes.
And that and Germany doesn't see why it's happening because Germany doesn't feel like being the leader and everything else. But Germany is leading by its stubbornness, by its actually refusal to see its policy on a broader scale and be more flexible. And that's what gets resentment going.
Let's take a very quick look at that resentment. We have a little report on how some other members of the Eurozone currently see Germany.
First among equals, a role to which Angela Merkel's grown accustomed. In the circle of EU leaders, she commands respect and frequently resentment. Worried Eurozone members simultaneously demand leadership from the EU's largest and healthiest economy and chafe under the burden when Berlin delivers. British and Southern European caricaturists depict the German Chancellor adorned with all the old Teutonic cliches, as a goose-stepping Prussian, a Nazi, and even as Hitler himself.
Ms. Müller, European unification was once seen as the best way to neutralize German power. We're now seeing Germany acting in a new role within Europe. Has the crisis reopened the so-called German question?
Yeah, this is how it is framed, but I advise those who are, coming up with those caricatures to come to Berlin and look around. They'll be dead surprised because they'll see rather shy members of the administration saying, no, we're not really comfortable with this. We'd want others to join us and jump in as well. Please help us out. Make sure that we have the French and we have smaller member states and everything. This is not what the Germans want. And there is a perception abroad yet. And this is dangerous because it's being lumped together with other decisions throughout the year about Libya, not really wanting to go and wage wars elsewhere, being interested, of course, in the rise of the BRIC countries, German exports.
Brazil, Russia, India,
and China. Do we really need the European Union? And, so Germany comes across as a power that is sort of looking elsewhere with its own strength. If you come to Berlin, you really don't feel as much. And I have to say that it's much about perceptions, but it's a very, very dangerous debate. If we are raising the new German question and, discussing it, this puts Berlin in a very difficult situation at a point in time when we need Berlin to take the lead with others. But, who else could do it? Nobody, really. So it does not widen the room for maneuver for this government to have a debate like this, which then brings up all those, ghosts of the past.
This might be an area where actually Angela Merkel and Barack Obama do have something in common. Quentin Peel, the Americans are currently favoring a strategy they call leading from behind.
Merkel is very much like that. She obviously likes doing this. She isn't forceful. She's actually probably one of the best things that's happened to Germany at the moment. It's very difficult to make really aggressive cartoons of somebody with her sort of image. And because she's a scientist and she's a thorough thinker, but also she's charming. She's got lovely laugh lines. She's got a great sense of humour. And so she goes down pretty well. When if you remember just a couple of weeks ago, when Volker Kauder, the parliamentary leader of the Christian Democrats, said, all Europe is speaking German now, and the British media went berserk. They had one of these periodic paroxysms of Germanophobia, and they went completely over the top. The truth is, it's nonsense. The problem is exactly that Germany doesn't want to lead rather than that it does want to bully.
But the British like to lead but they don't have the chance anymore.
The British have locked themselves into a complete dead end in Europe, and that was the tragedy of last week as far as they were concerned, that they're not even a member of the eurozone, they're not going to get any affected at all by these reforms, and yet they weren't prepared to do it unless they got a nice birthday present. Please defend the City of London and don't overregulate. So what they said about David Cameron at the summit was, it was like a man coming to a wife-swapping party and he didn't bring his wife.
Friedrich Thelen, very briefly, if you would, please. Some people are saying that Britain will emerge from this weaker than at any time before. Where's Germany going to emerge?
Well, not weaker, not stronger than before. I think Merkel plays it very cool, leading from behind and trying to keep the economic things together, and that is a good path. And I think Germany will be stable in the middle.
Thank you very much to all of you for being with us today, and thanks to our viewers out there for tuning in.